just Australia, but the entire murdering, occupying coalition. It's not your country, and you're making the situation worse. Get the fuck out!
SAS, USA, how many kids have you killed today? SAS, USA, how many kids have you killed today? SAS, USA, how many kids have you killed today?
Now, we are in front of the Defence Department, as you probably already know, and thanks for coming along. We are still in a time of COVID, and I wanted to ask you if you would mind making a little bit of distance between yourselves. I know we're all conscious of it. I think we just need to show others that we are conscious of it. We want the troops to be out. We want serious reparations to be made to the Afghans, and we certainly want the war criminals to face justice, including those that are ultimately responsible for what we're now learning, such as the former Prime Minister John Howard and the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott.
We've been in Afghanistan for 19 years. I ask you to imagine how you would feel if this country was being occupied by foreign forces for 19 years. I've got no doubt that you would be joining the resistance and the opposition to that occupation if that were the case. Don't overlook the fact that the invasion of Afghanistan was illegal itself from the very start. It was not sanctioned by the United Nations, and the decision to join the invasion was not even taken by the Australian Parliament. We should never have been there in the first case. So today, my sadness is turning into anger. It angers me that we joined the invasion of Afghanistan, just as it angers me that we also invaded Iraq. I do not understand why we went in, and I do not understand why we cannot leave. There is no more destructive force on this earth than the tight alliance of nations centralized around the United States, which on foreign policy functions as a single empire. The only beneficial thing that such a blood-soaked empire could do for the good of the world is to cease its behaviour and cease to exist.
What we are seeing here is a culture that allowed this brutality to go on. And that culture must be investigated, it must be owned, and it must be addressed. The post-9/11 wars on terror have raged on for many, many years. These wars have killed over 500,000 civilians in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Pakistan. Let's never forget that. Surely we have to admit that deploying armed forces, deploying guns, deploying bombs in the name of quashing terrorism will not protect anyone. It never has, and it never will. It has the exact opposite effect. We must stop warmongering. We must stop blindly following the US. We need to seriously reconsider the utility of the ANZUS alliance and get US troops off Australian soil.
The same things that we've been saying over and over again. We want to get rid of ANZUS. Howard led us into Afghanistan using ANZUS. He said we have to go to the support of the United States because of ANZUS. And he used a section of that to justify it. Australian-US alliance, we must get rid of it. We must be an independent country that doesn't jump to attention and go off to these terrible wars at the bequest of the United States. No more Australian involvement in US wars.
Yes.
We must start doing that. The whistleblower, I was listening to a broadcast by him today. He said the only reason that we're in Afghanistan was to satisfy the Americans. We have to reduce military spending. Reduce military spending. In the middle of a pandemic, we were sending ships to the South China Sea. And this is what they're doing in the middle of a pandemic. And there's been a $1 billion increase in military spending. That's what, $1 billion. Could you imagine that in the middle of a housing crisis? But there's never any money for social housing, and there's always money for guns. So comrades, keep up the great work you've been doing.
But we have to be clear that these crimes are not exceptions to the rule. These crimes are systematic. They are the tactics that have been used and have been confirmed from the very top. And they have been consistently hidden from the public. And they really prove that going into war in the first place was never about a humanitarian intervention, was never about helping the poor oppressed people in the Middle East. It was always about imperialism. It was all about increasing the US's hegemony. It was all about oil. And this really shows, I think, what a horrific system that we live in, where millions upon millions of people have to die for this.
Shame indeed, shame indeed. Brereton made it clear that the conditions that allowed those sadistic executions to take place are systemic in the army. Even if as a senior ADF officer himself, his report really downplays that fact. But the systemic character of that violence, again, was no surprise, I think, to most of us here. The units responsible for the outrages in the Brereton report are the same ones that flew a swastika flag on their armoured vehicle, the same ones who were formally ordered not that long ago to wear death symbols, and the same ones who blooded young recruits by having them kill Afghans. And they went undisciplined for years. More, they were decorated with the highest honours. Jim Molan, the butcher of Fallujah, a war criminal, sits in the federal Senate still. It's no wonder that this kind of action by the ADF was undisciplined and in fact rewarded. Now, Brereton's report records 39 cases of murder and 2 cases of what he calls extreme cruelty or cruel treatment. And it's quite important to note, I think, that that's just between 2009 and 2013. How much other murder and torture didn't make it into Brereton's accountancy in the other 8.5 years of Australia's longest war? When he increased the SAS contribution to that campaign in 2007, Howard told the media that there's a lot at stake if terrorists gain a safe haven in Afghanistan. Well, you know what? The safest havens in that country, the ones that would never be attacked by any Western attack helicopter, were the ones inside the Australian Defence Force's own bases in Uruzgan province. Shame on the ADF, shame on the government. This is pretty much the last point I have to make. Brereton writes in his report, in the section that's called something like "Why This Is Important," he writes this: moral authority, he says, is an element of combat power. If we don't hold ourselves on the battlefield to at least the standards we expect of our adversaries, we deprive ourselves of that moral authority and that element of our combat power. We want no part in Australia's wars overseas, whether they're fought by commandos, by the vicious butchers in the SSS, or the regular armed forces, or whether the foreigners these people killed are killed legally or not. We don't want no part of any of this. And we demand not only that the SAS be disbanded, but that we divert the billions of taxpayer dollars currently lavished on war to those sectors of our society that our politicians see as far less of a priority: health, social welfare, education, reconciliation. That is expenditure that might actually make this country a better and less vicious place. Thanks to everyone for being here today.